A new study shows that young men may be developing schizophrenia as a result of cannabis use. Another study shows that hearing aids may prevent dementia in people with hearing loss. And finally, will a physician be writing your exercise program soon? We're going to cover all of that today on The Prescription Press, the podcast where we break down medical news stories so we can live longer and healthier lives. I'm your host, Nolan Fisher. I'm a physician. Let's get into it. All right, today we're joined on the podcast by Sam Stix.
What's going on?
And we're going to get straight into the articles. We're not going to waste any time. So we have a couple articles today, and then we're going to get deep into Zone 2 exercise. The first article we have is Young Men at Highest Schizophrenia Risk from Cannabis Use. This is by Megan Brooks, and this was on Medscape where I found this. I thought it was a really interesting article because the first big line that jumped out to me was, quote, investigators estimate that roughly 15% of schizophrenia cases among young males may be preventable by avoiding cannabis use disorder, which was shocking to hear. Overall, the article looked at about 60,000 people, I believe, and they were Danish, which apparently means they're from Denmark, if we got that correct.
Yeah.
And so another statistic and another quote said that the overall adjusted hazard ratio for cannabis use disorder on schizophrenia was slightly higher among males than females, and that was 2.42 versus 2.02, which just means that the males had a 2.4 times the risk of having schizophrenia if they had cannabis use disorder, and females had twice the risk. However, among those aged 16 to 20 years, the adjusted incidence risk ratio for males was more than twice that for females, 3.8 to 1.1. So young males at a 3.8 times risk of developing schizophrenia if they had cannabis use disorder, which is crazy. And then finally, it's nuts. And then there's one more quote that I thought was really that I thought of and then read on it later. It said, "It is, of course, nearly impossible to use epidemiological studies to actually prove causation, but all the numbers behave exactly in the way that would be expected under the theory of causation." Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't study the theory of causation, and I don't know if you did, but
no, that's not me.
Yeah. But immediately, whenever I see this, I think, okay, is this correlation or is this causation? Is it just the case that people with schizophrenia are more likely to abuse different substances and cannabis is readily available? Or is it that cannabis is causing schizophrenia? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I know that was my first thought too. I'm like, can marijuana turn anyone schizophrenic, or is it like only people who are predisposed to schizophrenia have it essentially triggered by marijuana use, right?
Yeah.
I think there'd be a lot of celebrities that we're well aware of that would probably be schizophrenic at this point, whether it be, Snoop Dogg's, the Wiz Khalifa's of the world, whatever else. But Willie Nelson, all those dudes.
Willie Nelson.
So it's like
Miley Cyrus's dad, of course, Billy Ray Cyrus.
Yeah, exactly. I know we just got an army of schizophrenic celebrities out there in Hollywood. They're crushing it, powering through. But I guess my first thought too is I had never heard of cannabis use disorder before. I'm not sure if that's something you're familiar with at all. Like, I assume it's probably people who abuse cannabis who need it to function on a daily basis. Like, what does that look like?
That's exactly it. So any sort of substance use disorder really comes down to, is it impossible for them to quit using that substance, and is it impacting their daily life? So does it impact their ability to hold a job or to have, good relationships with their family, friends, those sort of things? Cannabis use disorder, of course, it depends on the person. There are a lot of people that you could say they're abusing cannabis, but they seem to be able to have normal relationships. They have great jobs. So it's kind of a subjective thing. Realistically, though, if it's impacting your life in a negative way, then it's considered cannabis use disorder.
Interesting.
And
okay.
I think that's really interesting, too, what you said about the celebrities who are using cannabis all the time and are still perfectly fine. It does seem like some people are predisposed, and then there's some people that are almost immune to having mental breakdowns from drugs. There's like no shortage of rock stars that you see that have been partying for the last 50 years using all sorts of drugs, and you hear them talk and they sound fine, which is shocking. But with that being said, there may be an underlying schizophrenia that is brought out by any sort of substance abuse, and that cannabis is the most likely culprit. Yeah,
no doubt.
So the question is, do you think that by making cannabis legal, that we're making more people think it's safe, and as a result, getting more people to develop schizophrenia?
No, for sure. It's funny you say that too. I was driving around with Emily yesterday, and we're driving past this dispensary, and they got a drive-through, and I'm like, is that a thing now? Like, there's drive-through cannabis dispensaries. I'm like, I don't know if it's legal to get alcohol like through a drive-through line. Like, I don't know if that's a thing. Maybe not. Maybe if it's like a closed container. I mean, definitely not open container. That would be insane.
Well, but there were some places during
like,
COVID that were doing that. They were taking like slushies that were alcohol, and they were taping over the top of the lid to say it was a closed container.
Apparently it's a thing. I don't know. It just seems crazy to me, like counterintuitive. Like, people are going to smoke and drive. Like, there's no question if they're doing that, which is just also insane. But
you
like
see
you
it
said,
like every day though. If you're driving around, you see it every day.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So like you said, it's like so normalized now. Like, it's like you can go to McDonald's drive-through and then hit the cannabis drive-through right after. It's like, it's so normal that I do wonder what the impact is going to be. Like, are people going to be like developing schizophrenia like a much higher clip now? Like, are we going to see like things continue to spike? Especially, I mean, there's some states I don't believe it's legalized in. Probably a pretty considerable number.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens with these numbers, I guess, the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that the question becomes, well, should it be illegal? And then you could make the argument that it shouldn't be illegal.
Yeah.
But that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's necessarily safe. You know, the one thing that I always think about is like cars are legal because they're valuable, right? But one of the most dangerous things that any of us will do is get into a vehicle. Like, one of the most likely chances of younger people dying is in motor vehicle accidents. And I think about that with marijuana is like, are the societal benefits enough to justify it being legal? With that being said, does the government have any business telling us that we can't smoke a natural plant? So that's I don't know, that I guess that gets a little into the politics of it, but it certainly is going to have an impact on a country that already has mental health issues that are becoming worse and worse.
Yeah, and this is definitely just one factor too. Like with schizophrenia, it's like, what else does marijuana potentially lead to in terms of it? And then once again, whenever you're doing a study like this, it is hard because there's so many variables, right? There's a million different factors as to why somebody develops a predisposition or whatever. So
it's like any study on diet, right? Any study on diet is just
I think of like those red meat studies, all those red meat studies. It's like, I mean, people were like pretty deathly afraid of red meat. I mean, there's still plenty of people that are deathly afraid of red meat because of studies that were done 20 years ago or so, where, you know, they weren't basically controlling other variables. Like, if you go to McDonald's and get a hamburger, are you getting a large Coke with it? You know what I mean? Or a large fry? It's like, there's plenty of other factors. So
that's a whole nother conversation. But I think as far as schizophrenia risk goes, if what the average person should take away is that just by smoking pot, they're not going to develop schizophrenia. But if you're somebody with a family history of schizophrenia, I would be trying to optimize my lifestyle in every sort of facet to keep my brain as healthy as possible, because it's one of those diseases that is incredibly debilitating to every area of your life, because it's more than just hallucinations and hearing voices and stuff like that. There's actually these negative signs of schizophrenia where people start to like shut down emotionally, socially, stuff like that. And a lot of times I think it's just because they don't want to be perceived as the oddball because of their disease. But I mean, anything else on schizophrenia or this article?
No, I think that's it, honestly. The only other thing that really stood out to me was the men versus women, how it seems to affect men more, but that could probably just be because men abuse it potentially more on a whole compared to women. I mean, but who knows?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's probably right. I also think that the male brain doesn't mature until later than the female brain.
True.
So I think that probably plays a role in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I got for this article. Let's go on to this next article, which was also on Medscape. It was titled "Hearing Aids: A Powerful Tool for Reducing Dementia Risk." It was also by Megan Brooks. I thought this article was fascinating. There's more and more research about this coming out, especially as hearing aids are becoming more readily available. They did a review of, I believe, around 500,000 people in the UK who were aging. And of those 500,000, I want to say it was about 25% that developed hearing loss. And of those 25%, I believe 12% of the total amount, so about half the people that developed hearing loss, got hearing aids. From this, they were able to see how many people went on to develop dementia, and then different subtypes of dementia like Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and then all-cause dementia. And then they were also able to see the protective effect of hearing aids. The first quote that's really stuck out to me was that there is a, quote, 42% increased risk for dementia in people with hearing loss compared with their peers with no hearing trouble. In addition, there was no increased risk in those with hearing loss who used hearing aids. That's pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. Then another quote I saw was that after controlling for relevant cofactors compared with people without hearing loss, those with hearing loss who were not using hearing aids had an increased risk for all-cause dementia, and the hazard ratio was 1.42, so there was a 42% increased risk, and that's where they got it from at the first part. No increased risk was seen in people with hearing loss who are using hearing aids. And then one of the other things that I thought was really interesting was that they said they can't really do a good, high-quality randomized controlled trial on this. It's like the gold standard for any sort of research is the randomized controlled trial. But like this Gil Livingston, who's a physician, and Sergi Costafrida, who's also a physician and a researcher with the University College London, said that there was the evidence that hearing aids are a powerful tool to reduce the risk of dementia in people with hearing loss is as good as possible without randomized controlled trials, which might not be practically possible or ethical because people with hearing loss should not be stopped from using effective treatments. So my first takeaway from this is that hearing aids have been thousands of dollars forever. Mm-hmm. And they've been really hard to get because they're just cost prohibitive, and insurances have said that they are not going to cover them because the research wasn't there. Well, now it seems like the research is there, and it's only a matter of time before they should start covering them. However, in our country, if you're over 65 years old, that's the people that are most likely to get hearing loss, and they're going to be covered by Medicare. Mm-hmm. So Medicare, by saying yes to covering hearing aids, is going to have to cover a lot of money's worth of hearing aids, and that's probably something that they can't afford it without some sort of increased tax or something like that. What did you think about the article?
Yeah, first things first, I did not know that insurance. You're saying insurance doesn't cover hearing aids?
Insurance doesn't cover hearing aids.
That blows my mind. That blows my mind. That's crazy.
Not for like age-related hearing loss.
Okay.
If there's let's say a child who has some sort of hearing condition needs hearing aids, that usually gets covered. But as far as like age-related hearing loss, insurance usually doesn't cover it, and Medicare doesn't cover it.
Wow, that's crazy. I would have for sure figured that if you go to a doctor, you get a hearing test done, they go, "Oh, you're hearing below a standard baseline level." That I would have figured there'd been an option for that, which is mind-blowing to me. Yeah. I think one thing that we talked about too is it seems like more and more people, and it's probably because the population is getting older, and just like people are living longer than they've ever lived. But I feel like everybody knows somebody who has dementia or has Alzheimer's or one of these diseases that affects your ability to remember everything. So I don't know. It's really, really fascinating that we're getting this information. I've seen this in a couple other studies maybe in the past couple of years come out as well recently. I think you might have been the one that maybe first explained this to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. Like, right, if you can't hear things, if you're in your house and you're not getting mental stimulation, you can't have conversations with your loved ones, with your friends, whatever, like, you're just going to feel disconnected, which is going to probably cause a host of other mental issues for you. But you're also not going to get that stimulation where your brain is constantly thinking, like, for sure, like when you're doing things like whether it's doing puzzles or whatever, like you can feel your brain being exercised, or conversations you're having with people. Like you feel that stimulation. Like there's something going on in your head that is absolutely healthy for you. So missing out on that aspect of, you know, on that variable, that experience you get on a regular basis is for sure going to have negative impacts on your health. Like there's no question.
Well, our body naturally atrophies what we're not using, so it's like constantly changing, and this is most visible with our muscles, right? If you're doing a bunch of bicep curls, your biceps are going to get bigger. If you stop, they're going to go away. But that also pertains to our brain, and if people aren't getting that hearing stimulus, it's not only going to impact how well they're able to hear, but it's also going to impact their social skills. It's going to impact how much they're able to hear on the TV. And like, as a result, you know, they're going to have some sort of decline. It's really interesting to me that they said this impacted Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. You would think that Alzheimer's is genetically predisposed. You would think that wouldn't be affected by this because you think it's just related to the genetic predisposition. But with that being said, it does seem that Alzheimer's is really more of a bunch of different factors that eventually lead to it. Things like inflammation, diet, amount of exercise, trauma, all seem to cause Alzheimer's. So it seems like that's more of a multifactorial disease rather than just a truly genetic one. And vascular dementia, just from having cardiovascular issues, atherosclerosis, basically just uncontrolled hypertension and diabetes can cause vascular dementia. That's the most common cause of it. You get shrinking of the brain because it's not getting enough blood. But the fact that just having the hearing aids can decrease the risk of vascular dementia doesn't really make sense to me, but who knows, there may just be some overlap, and that's why. But it definitely makes sense with all-cause dementia being lower because you're getting more of a stimulus.
What I
was thinking about this is what makes people not want to get hearing aids?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny. I was having a conversation with my mom recently too, because my mom thinks that my dad's having issues with hearing and whatnot. I don't know if I necessarily see that, but I think there's definitely a negative stigma. Like people don't want the device behind their ear. They think that maybe like when they're old, you know, I would see if you're someone who's 60 years old, you don't probably feel 60 years old, but you still feel like you're 40. And you picture, people who wear hearing aids are old. Like old people wear hearing aids. I don't want to be an old person. I want to pretend like I'm 45, whatever still. So I think for sure there's a negative stigma, like you said. And I think it probably has to do with, I don't know, wanting to feel like you're younger than you are. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And also like perception, like you said, the way people will perceive you, not just how you perceive yourself, but how others will perceive you as well. Yeah. The good news is that hearing aids are getting so small.
Yeah, they are.
That they're basically unnoticeable. If you have them in certain colors, you can hardly tell. Obviously, if people are looking for them, they can see the tubes going into your ears. But I think it's the concern of your perception on yourself being that, like you said, you don't want to be like, hey, I'm old. Yeah. But you also don't want other people to have that perception of you. Yep. And then I think third is the price. Which once this becomes something that is covered by Medicare, maybe that will affect it. But if it's not covered by Medicare, I think there's just a large enough market with an aging population, and the technology is available that there should be more competition to bring the price down. That's what I think.
No, for sure seems like it.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I wrote down is about this article is like, it didn't touch on it, but like, what's the impact on happiness when you take somebody who doesn't have hearing aids and then gets hearing aids, or if you take somebody that never got hearing aids, how much happier would they have been? And I think it's a significant amount, because if you are in a social situation, you can't hear, you can't participate.
Oh yeah. No question.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot more to it than just dementia. I even think it's just a quality of life thing in general.
Yeah.
It really matters.
Absolutely. No question, man.
Yeah. Did you have anything else on this article?
No, I think you kind of covered it, to be honest. Like you said, I mean, hopefully people can get access to these devices and whatnot.
Yeah.
On an easier moving forward, I guess, with prices and whatnot. But yeah,
what's really cool about the hearing aids now is they actually use artificial intelligence. And so you don't actually go to a physician. Usually you go to an audiologist.
Okay.
And they play different sounds and they see what you can hear and what you can't hear. And then they give you a chart of like how well you can hear each frequency.
Yeah.
And so you can see where you're deficient at. And then they can customize the hearing aid to just boost the frequencies that you can't hear. And then if you can't hear those frequencies and you can't hear them at all, then it can actually translate what you're hearing in that frequency to a different frequency that you can hear.
Interesting. Have you ever had a hearing test done, like an official hearing test from an audiologist before?
I've not.
I have. I've had 2 of them, actually.
You've had 2 of them.
I've had 2 of them. It was crazy. So I had this clicking in my ear that I was experiencing. Like, I don't know. It's gotten better. It's still there. But there's this clicking I was experiencing in my ear, and I was like, this is so weird. I went to, I guess, an ENT, and one of the standard things they always do is, like, we want to check your hearing. And like I said, it was a persistent problem. So I went 1 year and then waited a couple and went back. I'm like, hey, I'm still having this issue. But going into that room where they actually do the test is like one of the trippiest experiences ever. Like, you're in this room. Oh, my God, it's so strange. Like, you can't hear it's the strangest thing ever. Your voice is only like in your own head. Like when you're breathing and stuff, it is like so much louder in your own head when you're in this room that's like completely soundproof. Like you can only hear like sounds reverberate like in your own body because like they can't bounce off anything else. So you're experiencing
it's like sensory deprivation.
Oh, dude, it is trippy. I'm like so self-conscious. I'm like, I feel like I'm breathing so loud, and the girl's in there with me like doing the test. I'm like. And meanwhile I'm like breathing normal, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just the craziest thing. It was a crazy experience. But yeah, man, I think for sure people who are older should not be afraid to get those tests done at least and see where they're at in terms of baseline and whether or not they can bring it up to a healthy level. Yeah,
I don't know that we necessarily need any information to say that hearing aids reduce dementia risk, but for getting it covered and getting people to like increase like, you know, the amount of resources that they're going to spend to develop hearing aids and stuff. I think it's good to have research studies like this. Yeah. So that's the takeaway. If you can't hear, or people telling you can't hear, go to an audiologist, get your hearing aids. They're expensive, but they're better than having dementia.
Yeah. I like that. Easy enough, right?
Yeah. And then the last thing we have to talk about is the Rogan episode, right? Or it was a Rogan clip.
Yeah, it was from a recent episode with Dr. Peter Attia, and this is obviously on Spotify. It's where he has the full episodes, but there's all these clip channels that clip them on YouTube and whatnot. So I sent you a short clip from that episode. Basically, it sounds like you're familiar with Peter Attia. I had never heard of him before. So it sounds like he's an MD who's basically kind of designed his practice to help people live longer and kind of just suffer less as they age. I watched some other videos of his too. I mean, I highly recommend for people who have not heard of him before, like definitely check those out. He does some really cool stuff with charts and stuff. Just, I guess, you know, showing things visually as well in terms of kind of what he's talking about. It's really awesome.
Yeah, because he's talking about such complex topics.
Oh yeah,
too.
For sure. And then it makes it look so simple when he does it. So
absolutely, really
cool. But basically, in the clip that I sent you, he kind of just states that he thinks that exercise is really the most important variable for living longer. So, I mean, I guess from your perspective, or at least from my perspective and your perspective too, like the other big things that I would think like large variables would obviously be like diet and sleep, maybe like mental health. But I don't know, are those kind of like the big like 4 that you would kind of think like, I guess, exercise, diet, sleep, and then like mental, cognitive?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we get into like lifestyle medicine type stuff, there's the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. To me, the most important like foundational aspects of medicine are diet and exercise. And then I would also put sleep in there, and then stress. Obviously they kind of are a two-way street with each other, because the better you eat, the more active you are, the better you're going to sleep, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then the better you sleep, the less stressed you'll be. And the less stressed you are, the more you're going to end up eating right and exercising. So it's kind of like this either positive feedback loop or negative feedback loop, depending on what side you're on it. But exercise is the single best medicine for just about every single condition we have. The problem is that pharmaceutical companies don't make money off exercise. So you aren't seeing a lot of commercials on TV for, go outside and go on a jog, because nobody makes money off of that except for the people making the running shoes. And so, maybe those fitness apparel brands are the people that do it the most. But certainly exercise. And then what Peter Attia talks about with the different types of exercise are super important to know the difference.
No, for sure. I think something interesting as well that he kind of said was, and this kind of blew my mind, is he said that basically smoking or having diabetes is less influential on your overall health than having good cardiorespiratory health. And that's one of those factors that he mentioned. And we'll talk about the other two here in a second. But, I guess those things kind of make sense. Like, I guess they kind of go hand in hand. Like, how many smokers are also marathon runners? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
I don't picture anyone who runs competitive marathons at an elite level as ever smoking cigarettes, but
I don't know if you saw the Chinese guy.
Oh, no.
That completed a Chinese marathon. He smoked cigarettes the entire way.
I missed that.
He is an absolute legend. And not only did he run the marathon, I think he ran it under 3 hours.
Wow. Damn.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, he's incredible. But Peter Attia said that your risk of dying, your all-cause mortality, if you smoke or have diabetes, is about 2 to 3 times that of the average person. So your risk is increased by double or triple if you have diabetes or smoke. If you exercise and you have a high cardiorespiratory fitness level, then you have like a 5 times less likelihood of dying.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive.
Oh, it's crazy.
That's super impactful. And it's not something, we all know exercise is good for us, but unless we know the specifics as to how much it actually helps, then it's just like, it's good for you. Right? If it can prevent you from dying, though, that's significant.
Oh, no question. Yeah. No, the other interesting thing was, it sounds like, he tests people, like at his practice, he tests people's physical fitness levels, and the attributes that he tests are cardiorespiratory fitness, which seems obviously completely self-explanatory. People's strength, which I think, has a lot of other positive attributes, like on bone density and things like that I'm aware of. But then he also tests muscle mass as well, which I think is interesting, because I think those first two variables, like I said, they make sense. But I for sure want to hear your opinion on the muscle mass piece, because I guess from my perspective, I've always heard that the more muscle mass you have, and maybe there's a point of diminishing returns here, but the more muscle mass that you have, I've always heard it's harder for your heart essentially to just pump blood through your massive body, essentially. Like, that's why you see taller people a lot of times not live as long as shorter people. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of curious to hear if you have any thoughts on the muscle mass piece of that.
Yeah. The reason that people with higher muscle mass live for longer is that older people tend to have muscle atrophy as they age, and their muscle actually gets replaced with fat. Whenever you take the older people and you get them back to a more normal level of muscle mass, then they tend to live longer and they have a lower risk of all-cause mortality. However, if you add too much muscle mass to somebody, eventually there's a point where it actually is worse for you. And that's because, exactly like what you said, increases blood pressure, increases the risk of cardiovascular problems. And then another thing too, with older people, they are the ones that are dying more frequently. So they skew the number towards, if you have lower muscle mass, then you're more likely to die. Well, of course, if you're 95 years old, you're probably going to have pretty low muscle mass regardless of how healthy you are. That's just like the natural evolution of things. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought it was interesting the test that he uses too. So like, you think of like strength tests, I would think like max squat, max bench, etc. But a lot of people at his practice are probably going to be older folks. So the tests that he uses are like things like grip strength. He said dead hang as well. So it's how long you can hang from a bar, I guess, with extended arms for, I think he said like they try to do 2 minutes at his practice for men and 1 minute 30 for women, age dependent once again. and then like air squats, things like that. So things you would basically picture as like pretty normal things. I don't know how many people are hanging from bars necessarily on a regular basis, but functional
Feels
strength,
good.
functional strength.
2 minutes hanging from a bar is pretty tough.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to try that. I was listening to like, I think I could do that, but I don't know. We'll see. So
all of the things that he does them because there's been previous studies done on them. So the hang from the bar is something simple that you could study. Mm-hmm. You could have a bunch of people hang from a bar, time them, and then you could follow them for the next 20 years and see how many of them died, how many of them are disabled. You know, the test where people sit and stand from a chair is a super common test that's studied to see how active people are and how fit they are. Yeah,
can you explain that?
Let me see.
I heard him say that on the pod. What does that mean exactly? You like stand up 5 times from a chair?
Yeah, there's a test where you don't use the arms of a chair. Okay. And you just have somebody over a certain period of time, usually it's like 30 seconds, just sit down and stand up as many times as possible.
Interesting.
And so as a result, you know, people get older, are less active. It takes them a while to get up and down out of a chair, and it can really be exhausting. The other thing too is it looks at like the big muscle groups getting out of a chair without using your arms. It looks at your butt, it looks at your quads and stuff like that. So
interesting. Yeah. No, like I said, I mean, most of the stuff he was talking about seems like it's built around that functional strength. It's all like stuff that's relatively simple to do in terms of, I mean, I'm sure you can alter the way you train for this stuff, but I guess some of the exercises.
Did you see the part where he talked about?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, did you see the part where he talked about zone 2?
Yeah. I want you to go into that because I heard him talk about this zone 2 cardio level where it's like he basically wants you to do 45 minutes of exercise 4 times per week, but specifically at this zone 2. So I'm not 100% sure. I've heard like Orange Theory where they have like these different like heart, I guess, like, I don't know, what is it, like your pulse essentially they're measuring, and how, I don't know, is it similar to that? I don't know.
Yeah, so zone 2, so there's different zones for training, and this is all just something that's been made up, but basically the first zone that you're in is like very, very easy. And then once you get up to something that would be like a nice jog, or like something where you're breathing a little bit more than normal, but you can still have a conversation, that's kind of like the zone 2 level. Zone 3, then you're getting where it's a little more hard to have a conversation. You maybe can only say a few words. And then above zone 4 and zone 5, you're doing all out. And that's where you can't even have a conversation. The thing that's interesting about this is that it all comes back to how well your mitochondria work in your cells. Okay, because the most efficient way for you to do exercise is by using fat and then oxidating it, which is just a process of breaking it down to get energy out of it in your mitochondria. And so in order to do that, you have to have enough oxygen, and then you have to have enough mitochondria in your muscles. So what happens is if you're on a run and you're breathing a little harder than usual, but you're still like not completely out of breath, that means that you are still taking that oxygen, putting it to your mitochondria. It's breaking down fat and then turning it into energy. What happens with when we're doing sprints, for example, is that that process isn't fast enough. So it actually uses sugar that's outside of the mitochondria in your muscles, breaks that down to give immediate energy, but it's not as efficient, and it produces lactic acid.
Interesting.
And so when it produces lactic acid, that's when your muscles start burning. And eventually that's why you can't sprint all out for so long, is because you have too much lactic acid in your muscles. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's the difference, is fatty oxidation versus glycolysis, which is just breaking down the sugar in your muscles. Yeah. So you're kind of always doing both of them. It's just what percentage of your energy is coming from each of them.
That's interesting.
So the goal with Peter Attia in zone 2, what he's explaining is that you're trying to get to that state where you're using your mitochondria to break down the fatty acids, because that will tell your body that you need to, 1, make your mitochondria more efficient, and then 2, make more of those mitochondria in your muscles, so that way you can do more of that exercise.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now I want to ask then, because you talked about the sugar, right? So does that sugar, does that come from your blood essentially? Is it just like blood sugar will produce?
Yeah, there's blood sugar, but the more immediate sugar that you need is actually stored in your muscles as glycogen.
Okay.
And it's like readily available in all your muscles.
Interesting.
And it takes time to replenish it. So basically what they have these heart rate zones, but they are more of just general rules. I actually like using breathing as a metric better than heart rate, because if you're breathing at a point where you can have a conversation like we're having, then you're not really doing any significant exercise. You know, you may just be like walking at a very slow pace. But if you get to the point where you're kind of huffing puffing like that a little bit, but you can still have a conversation with somebody, that means that your body needs more oxygen than normal, and it's getting it to do this fatty oxidation to produce energy in the mitochondria. But it's not using it's not going over to glycolysis, which is breaking down that sugar near the muscles. The reason you start having that heavy breathing when you get to glycolysis, and that's how you know you're going too hard and you're above zone 2, is because that lactic acid has to be removed from your body, and it's converted to CO2 that you have to breathe off. So whenever you're breathing really hard, whenever you're doing a sprint, you're not gasping for oxygen. You're actually breathing off the CO2.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. So the average person can just take their breathing as a tool to kind of tell that they're doing the right level of exercise. And realistically, if you're doing cardiovascular exercise, you want to stick most of the time in the zone 2, where you have a slightly increased rate of breathing, but can still have a conversation. And then if you really want to go hard to that past the lactate threshold, they call it, then you only want to do that maybe once a week, or once every 2 weeks.
Now, what would be the reason for wanting to limit that instead of wanting to hit that 3 times a week and just like go balls to the wall essentially?
Because you're not optimally training your mitochondria then. So you're actually building more muscle by doing that. So that's why sprinters tend to be really jacked, is because they're using all the sugar.
Okay.
And so your body will build more muscle so it can store more sugar and be more explosive. But as a result, you're not as efficient. And that's why marathon runners tend to be very long and lanky and skinny. And that's because they're very efficient. They don't need all the extra bulky muscle.
Damn, that's fascinating. That's really interesting.
And
actually.
So heart rate can be largely variable, and it varies so much person to person. Do you know who Eliud Kipchoge is?
Sounds like a marathon runner.
Yeah, he's like the number 1 marathon runner in the history of the world.
Okay.
He's the best. He's the first guy to break the 2-hour barrier. He runs, and if you watch him run during his marathons, he's running like 4-minute mile paces for an entire marathon. And you look at him, he's never breathing hard.
He's like nose breathing, or like mouth's barely open.
His mouth is barely open.
That's crazy.
It's super impressive though, because his heart rate when he's doing that is like at 170 or something.
Jeez.
It's super high, but he has mitochondria that are so efficient that his heart's just pumping that oxygen to his muscles, but he's never going over that lactate threshold to where he's burning out. And that's why he can do it for 26 miles, no problem.
That's insane. That's crazy. You know, the other thing that really stood out to me about this Peter Attia video and just Peter Attia's practice in general, I'm not sure how it works, like in terms of how like insurance covers what he does, right? Because I would imagine it doesn't. I would imagine it sounds like he's kind of like prescribing workout plans specifically to each of his patients, depending on how old they are, their current level of physical fitness, whether they're male, female. He's got like a list of variables that he uses. But I would imagine that's probably some sort of a premium medical service that he's providing. Probably the only people who are, pretty wealthy
that can afford it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to be, if I had to guess, it's probably cash.
Yeah.
They may have some people, they may do a model where they can try to bill the insurance for people that have a history of diabetes or hypertension or have a family risk. They may have some sort of model like that built in. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would definitely is more, if I had to guess, more of a concierge type thing.
No doubt. Yeah. I want you to maybe talk about something that we talked about a few weeks ago then too, in terms of like your plan, or not a plan, but like an idea that you had, something that you're hopeful to see in medicine, maybe in the next, I don't know, decade or so, maybe sooner, hopefully, for insurance to kind of start taking over and taking more responsibility for people's just general well-being.
Yeah. Well, I think so. The issue is that insurance typically covers somebody for maybe a few years at max, because people change jobs. So people are constantly changing insurances.
Okay.
So they don't have much incentive in doing preventative care, because if they pay for the preventative part, but they never get to see the decreased spending later, then they view it as a waste of money. So as a result, like the government is mandating different preventative measures being covered. I think one of the things that could be really interesting that's going to start happening soon are physician prescribed exercise plans. Now that we have Apple Watches, we have fitness trackers, and we have more technology inside gym equipment, we can actually start having prescriptions written for different types of exercise. And then people can go to a gym and there will be equipment where they can scan their badge or their Apple Watch or whatever. It'll give them their workout for the day as prescribed by the physician. They can then go to the treadmill and say, okay, I have to do 20 minutes at this heart rate, scan their watch on the treadmill, and it'll register if they do it or not. Then they can go around to, say, their weight machines that they need to do, scan the weight machine. It will count the reps as they're doing it. And this will all be reported this will all be transferred over to the electronic medical record, so that physicians can actually have a conversation with their patient and be like, okay, well, how have you been doing? Let's see at your workouts. Well, you've been consistently going 3 times a week, stuff like that. So the physician prescribed exercise plans would be something that I could see coming in the near future. And it's just because the technology has kind of just arrived.
Yeah, no doubt. And it doesn't seem like it's terribly different from a current day. Like if a doctor sends someone to a physical therapist, right? Yep. Obviously, you have a physical therapist there with a chart who's monitoring your exercises, counting reps, sets, all that stuff. Obviously, it'd be somewhat cost prohibitive to send everybody to a physical therapist who needs just simple exercise, though. So it's interesting with the technology, like you said, it's going to be more, less cost prohibitive, I guess, and just more accessible for people. So it'd be really dope to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that I get concerned about with Peter Attia is he's so in depth. I really like him, but he goes he just goes all out on whatever subject he's talking about. And I think some people can find it a little unapproachable. Yeah. Like it may be too much exercise for them. I think it's important to think about the minimum effective dose of exercise. It's like, what is the least amount of exercise I can do and still be healthy? And so there's actually studies on this, and they took obese and overweight men and they had them do, I believe, 3 treadmill sessions per week of like 30 minutes. And it essentially was in that zone 2 that we talked about. And their risk for cardiovascular disease dropped down to that of a normal, healthy weight male.
And what time period was this over? How long?
I think they did it over 8 weeks. And they had them change that, and it dropped their cardiovascular risk over, I don't know if they kept doing it. Yeah. I can't remember exactly what it is, but basically it's like, you can get lost in the oh, you have to do cardio. Oh, you have to do weights. You have to do this. Yeah. I think just incorporating a little bit of it, but being consistent over a long period of time is going to deliver the benefit. Yeah. And realistically, he likes to get people to perform at this super high level, where if you just do it to an adequate, relatively simple amount, you can get most of that benefit. Yeah. And I think most of the benefits just being moderately active.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think that's something he kind of touched on too. I don't know if it was in the video that I sent you or if it was something else I was looking at, but he said basically the biggest jump that people make are from extremely unhealthy to moderately healthy is kind of the biggest jump they'll see in terms of longevity and just quality of life. And then every jump past that is still, significant, but not as exponential as that first jump. So
and I think that's exactly it. So I think the thing with exercise programs is they can be super intimidating, but realistically, you need to do something that's going to get you to the zone 2. The zone 2 is just breathing harder than normal, but still able to have a conversation. And then it needs to be progressive over time. So if you keep if you keep running at the same speed, or if you keep walking at the same speed, eventually you're going to get in shape and you're going to need to make it a little more difficult.
Yeah.
But if you do that consistently a few times a week, for about 30 minutes starting and then working up for longer, and then you include some sort of weights, and that's could be just going to your gym and using the weight machines. So that way it's a controlled environment. You don't have to worry about hurting yourself, but focusing on like the big muscles. So like the leg machines that you push out, the shoulder press or the chest press, the back machines. I think those are the most important thing. And just doing those once or twice a week is all you need to get most of the benefit.
Yeah. No, that seems a lot more digestible and less intimidating than some of the stuff that you'll hear from these, advanced longevity doctors for sure. So yeah, that's pretty dope.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's cool. That's all I got for the Rogan episode, Cliff. Do you have anything else?
Dude, that's all I got too. Yeah. That was good.
All right, man.
That was fun.
If anybody's out there listening and they're addicted to cannabis, they can't hear anything and they aren't exercising.
Oh my God.
This podcast was made for you.
That's right.
Drop it in the comments if that's you. But otherwise, Sam, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, man.
I feel like you need to come back.
Dude, I'm down for it. Let's do it.
I think we'll do it again.
Cool.
Okay, that's all we got. This is the Prescription Press. If you're watching on YouTube, click subscribe below. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, click follow. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Yep. Peace, guys.